Welcome to Drop the Story. Thanks so much for being here. Today, I have Christabel Zamor.
I'm so excited to be here.
Christabel Zamor is a coach and seasoned somatic trainer with over 20 years of experience. She has taught over 1,000 professional facilitators, many of which lead psychedelic breath journeys, which have been proven to have a profound impact on cognitive function. Her Breath of Bliss facilitator training is a 200-hour ceremonial certification, empowering luminaries to rise up as community leaders and thrive by sharing love. Christabel, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate our chance to get to work together recently and make a promo for your upcoming course on Mystic Breath of Bliss facilitator training.
It was beautiful. I'm so excited to share it with you and more people.
You have been leading these breath journeys for decades now, right?
I've been leading Breath of Bliss for about a decade and sharing it all over the world in Bali, Australia, Malaysia, Thailand, now in Hawaii.
And you've been empowering coaches to also develop their own understanding of the framework for how to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've trained coaches in a variety of programs I've created, but also these professional facilitators of Breath of Bliss ceremonies. So they can have a structure and a framework to allow them to feel free sharing their creativity in a way that reliably creates these psychedelic experiences of awakening.
Well, as I was going through some of that footage that I saw over the past 10 years of you doing these trainings and these massive events, where hundreds, thousands of people sometimes are in the same space, breathing, working through what comes up, leaning into the possibility of bliss on the other side. That's really beautiful.
It has been the most extraordinary experience of my life to create this body. I wouldn't even call it body of work, body of love, and to empower others to share it, because the mere act of learning how to hold that state of presence and to invite people to a safe space of radical aliveness and permission for all of what they are, it has evolved me and invited me to befriend my shadows, my darkness, as well as open to the possibility of my divinity, so I can help others traverse that entire landscape for themselves. Yeah.
And for people who may have heard of breath work, can you give a little bit of context on the definition and why you chose bliss instead?
Yeah, well, I feel that we are instantly impacted by words as vibratory packets of possibility, right? And so if we label the practice work, I've witnessed pushing, efforting, struggling, and just the general resistance that comes with going to work or doing something that's work. But Breath of Bliss almost pre-programs the field of possibilities for expansion, euphoria, oneness, unity, connection, harmony, compassion, understanding, grace, miracles, all of the most exhilarating possibilities of pure presence. And also invites a more feminine flow in how we explore ceremony. So I love exploring the possibility of being in peace, being surrendered into the oneness with everything, the whole spectrum of being alive. And I feel like that is bliss. It's not some unachievable state of happiness that you're trying to maintain in a perpetual way, but it is yielding to the beauty of everything that it means to be alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that beauty is sometimes, on the other side of difficult experiences.
Yeah, we have to be able to hold ourselves, and we have to place ourselves in communities and with people who have the capacity to be with us, not just when we're on the upswing, but when we have the more challenging emotions arising. And so, Breath of Bliss creates these containers that teach us how to reparent ourselves and how to receive care and support if you're a lone wolf, how to co-regulate, how to open to community. And that in and of itself is such an important thing after the inside years we had, it's like softening the armoring, feeling it's safe to connect, all of these elements of healthy relating.
Yeah, ceremonial spaces in general are so valuable. And in my opinion, we don't have enough of them. There's traditional, religious context ceremonies. But this is more open-ended than that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I call it a ceremony, but truly it is an artistic expression of every facilitator, because we give a structural blueprint around certain basic experiences we guide people into, but every facilitator has a different cosmology, they have different belief systems, they have different types of art and beauty and color and magic that they bring. So literally, it's choose your own adventure, where you can design your own ceremony as the unique expression of your life learnings, right? And so you use the practice, but you're empowered with different transformational teaching templates and so forth that give you confidence in articulating your life experience in a way that empowers others and normalizes the challenges, But then, we also encourage people to create altars and practice the beauty way. So creating a space that visually lavishes the senses and sort of pre-primes the pineal and pituitary to access those expanded visionary states.
You mentioned the phrase, the beauty way.
Yeah.
Something that I really align with and, feel that I'm working to align my life with, but also my work with, and always kind of using that as a compass.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, the beauty way is so much about living as a modern day mystic and creating congruence in our own energy field and vibrational self-responsibility, vibrational hygiene through how we act, how we speak, how we dress, all of the exquisite self-care that's needed to refine the field of energy that we broadcast. Because in the end, it actually isn't about anything that you say, and this, or like what's happening. It's how people feel in your presence. And so I'm very passionate about discovering new ways to purify and elevate and radiate an energy field that is invitational and clear, fluid, transparent, welcoming, and gives permission for people to have those breakthroughs.
Yeah. And breath is such a non-exclusive, medicine.
Yeah.
It is not something that you have to go to the jungles of Peru for.
No, and we have been breathing since we've been children, and we've been, it's the one universal experience we've all had. And if you just think of the miracle of taking the first and the last breath, there's a level of presence that is called forth. And that presence is really what we nurture in Breath of Bliss, is that awareness of the miracle of being alive, and how the breath can quiet the storylines and the habitual chatter of this recycled consensus reality and take us out of the past or the future, right? The breath is just happening right now. So when you're just present with your breath and your body and this moment and this field, there's nothing to worry about or criticize or judge. There's nothing to try to control or manipulate. There's no agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just being.
For someone who has maybe never done a breathwork or Breath of Bliss ceremony, I'm curious if you could almost relate it in terms of a story arc. Like when you're entering into that space, take us on a little hero's journey. What does that feel like?
So you enter the space, and there's generally a circle of pillows and an altar in the center. Unless it's a grand event, then it might be set up differently. And there will be something of beauty in the space. So there'll be some invitation to open the senses, whether it's sage, aromatherapy, oracle cards, something while you're getting settled. And we begin with presence. So there's a dropping in, and we have a lot of different practices for that, but there's an opportunity to slow down the surface mind right from the start and to connect with the other people in the space, because it's all about connection. And then you move into an experience of I call it a Dharma talk. So it's a moment where there's a theme shared by the facilitator that might inform and empower the participants in some way, along with the explanation of how the breath flows and how to enjoy it. And then there's generally some kind of activation of the body. So whether it's a movement, a shaking, some kind of dynamic energy mobilization, and then heart opening practices, which lead you into the lying down journey. And the lying down journey brings you on an angelic experience of expansion, I would say. All the music is curated so that there's little to no possibility of activating a trauma response. There is attentiveness to the words that are spoken to soothe the nervous system and invite trust and safety. And that journey generally begins with prayer, some form of opening to the divine, and then normalizing the awareness of the body as you're breathing, and then going into the guided journey. And the music has an arc, right? So it's not just a meditative Zen experience, it's dynamic, where we bring people into a safe, expanded state of awareness. And in that expanded state, there can be sound healing. There might be drums or rattles or crystal bowls. There might be light language. And then it generally comes back into the field of grace with heart opening guidance again, until there's a shavasana and a sharing and nervous system regulation practices. So and people in just 2 hours or an hour and a half often have profound breakthroughs, like a forgiveness they never even knew they were hanging on to for years. It happens, or a visitation from a relative maybe who's passed over to the other side, or an awareness of a guide they never knew they had, or a total revelation of their soul purpose and what their next steps are, and radical action that gets inspired from those revelations. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So that would be kind of like a peak of the laying down portion.
And though it's anchored in the share, because that's why our sharing time is so important, because people will have these expanded states and they go into the shavasana and there's journaling or so forth. But to really anchor it in, speaking it and owning the insight, it often also inspires someone else in the space to have a realization. And so it's a very co-creative space as a community.
Did you also include ecstatic dance as a portion of that?
Yeah, so we have in the dynamic movement, we teach 6 different templates for ecstatic dance. So there's all these different practices we teach in the training. So just calling it dynamic movement is easier. Yeah.
I was curious if the dance came before or after, but that makes sense.
Yeah, but so it's done deliberately so that we create the coherence and the nervous system regulation as a group. Because when you first walk into a group of strangers, there's naturally often a sense of what do people think? Who are they? Stories of that I think I like that person. Oh, I don't like that. I might have something in common with them, but not them. And so first, just setting a space using certain practices we have to dissolve those stories and just feel the common humanity that we all share. It's so key before the Dharma, before we move and liberate all the energy. we warm up the lungs during the breath, so movement. So it's not just we're dancing.
No, I hear you.
Yeah, it's like, oh God, how can we discover new parts of our lungs that we can breathe into when we move our bodies in these dynamic ways? Or laughter yoga. Sometimes we have laughter yoga, which is a very activating practice for the lungs and releases so many feel-good chemicals in the brain. So
Awesome. Thanks for showing the arc of that. As you were just mentioning the lungs, I've heard that, if we're talking about what happens when we store trauma in the body, I've heard that the lungs are actually where grief can be stored.
There can be a lot of tears in breath of bliss and every breathwork practice that's sensitively guided, I think. And I think so much of that is because we're in a culture that doesn't normalize the full range of our emotional bandwidth. And grief especially is often hidden, and people spiral. And so when they're given permission to cry, and even the act of crying releases so many healing tonics and chemicals in the body. And so we often are holding space just for weeping. Everywhere on the spectrum, weeping to wailing can happen because it feels so good to finally have a safe space to let go. And to feel things you haven't felt you've had the right space or time. And part of what gives permission is the facilitator and having assistants we have a whole fleet of what I call angels who are doing hands-on healing and care and prayer and creating an intentional field which makes it safe to soften and let it go.
Yeah. Even just holding a hand sometimes can mean the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes people will put our hands on for just a moment and then leave. And they say, oh my God, it felt like your hands were there the whole time. You never left. And it's because there's something that has been awakened in the field, I feel angelic support.
I know a lot of this can, sound pretty woo-woo, right? Because we're talking about angelic, guides coming in and moving energy and where trauma gets stuck and all these things. But it's not that confusing. It's not that weird when you actually think about it and how much of a human experience that we actually don't give ourselves access to. And then all of a sudden you go to a breathwork or a breath of bliss experience and it's like, oh, I have so much more range.
And I don't think it's woo or weird because honestly, it's direct experience, right? And so anything I say is irrelevant. Honestly, all that matters is what each individual experiences directly without an intermediary between them and source. And so I might say, I feel angelics in the space, but you might say, my ancestors were here. And the next person might say, my heart was so alive, right? So we just have different vocabularies to express that presence. Yeah.
How much of our population doesn't have permission or let alone a container to feel safe enough to go into these emotions, to these experiences, and therefore feel the need to basically cope with life and shut it down and numb it out?
Yeah, well, there's an epidemic of disconnection. Yeah. People are starving to feel safe and to feel held and seen and loved. And, the world is constantly changing now. There's very little we can rely on as secure. And, politics are doing what they're doing. The economy is doing what it's doing. We're all having to pivot, reinvent. And so that can naturally create a sense of dysregulation in us. And I just think having these spaces of coherence where we can have a reliable moment of being held and welcomed and seen is nourishing on a soul level, and that trickles down to every aspect of our life. Yeah. Absolutely.
What was your first breath work, experience like?
My first experience, I had zero expectation. I was surprised by it in another workshop, a light body activation workshop. And so I went into it with zero idea of what would happen. I thought it would be like a yoga thing. And very soon after beginning the experience, I noticed tingling all over my whole body. Like it felt like shimmering light or prickling aliveness and vibration. And my eyes were instantly welling up with tears. And I was feeling a lot, but I didn't know what I was feeling. And the more I did it, my heart felt like it was feeling this love and this acceptance and this compassion. And it was a level of love that I was not familiar with. It was not how I felt about myself at that time. At that time, I was in a dysfunctional marriage. I had a lot of inner voices. I had some serious inner critics, and my life was, I was unhappy, you know? And then the love that I was feeling was so vast and so beyond anything I had experienced in my life that I just started weeping and feeling this light and what felt like angelic presences and this loving mother energy, this Mother Mary energy. And I started having these visions of myself, other lifetimes, other planets, other dimensions, and really just realizing what a little tiny speck of reality I had been living in with my little human moments of in the mind. And when I came out of it, I was just so blown away that I kept doing it as much as possible. I ended up changing my whole life, realigning, leaving lovingly that marriage and moving to paradise. I moved to Bali for 10 years. I started leading breathworks and creating Breath of Bliss. So
Truly transformational.
Life-changing, reality bending in every possible way.
I think that's literally the definition of transformational work.
Yeah.
Is you cannot be the same person afterwards.
For me, it's like, yes, there's stages. It's like I couldn't be the same person. I might have changed, but then I became no person. Like at the end, it's like there's no end, but it was this place now then all the time of like every label and every identity I might try to hold on to, or any packet of self just seems false. Yeah. And that's why in when we were shooting the earlier version of my promo and I was like, spiritual teacher slipped out of my mouth, I just couldn't stand that staying in there, because there's so many collective ideas about what that phrase means.
Yeah, it comes with a lot. It's loaded.
It's projection central, you know? And I feel like the older I get, the less I actually know. And I just want to just sit and be.
Oh, well, that's the humility of walking the beauty way.
Yeah.
Is realizing like I'm a lifelong student.
Yeah.
And not just this life, but all lives.
Yeah. Shedding the layers and the accumulations and coagulations and distortions. It's like, oh, another layer. So what's underneath that? I just keep coming back to presence. Yeah.
When you had that moment of realizing your life needed to change and you started doing it more and more, moving to Bali, what was the point where you felt, like, I need to share this? I need to be someone who is, a voice for this transformation?
Well, up until that time, I already had a very visible public presence in a creation of hoop dancing I had at that time with a company called Hoop Girl. So I had already been training teachers and magazines, in TV, books and stuff. So my very nature is to share what is alive for me in the moment. That's how that whole empire started, because I became obsessed with hoop dancing and I just had to share it with the world, right? And so when this thing happened with me with soon to be Breath of Bliss, I immediately started sharing it in my women's circles. So I was already gathering women for circles. I was already leading retreats to Hawaii. And I felt I just needed to offer that organically and talk about it incessantly, because there's something about me that is just designed to advocate for what is changing my life and the possibility for others. So it was immediate. And I went and eventually taught at Envision Festival in Costa Rica. It was my first big one for 70 people. Immediately afterwards, people were like, "Are you training teachers? We want to know how you do it. It's so different than other breath work." And at that time, I didn't even have the words. Like, it was just a free form psychedelic experience. So I reverse engineered all the templates just from what I seemed to be doing every time.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, organic.
I think that's actually such an authentic approach, right? Is to just experiment, see what sticks.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people try to plan, design, orchestrate, copy, etc.
That does not work.
Well,
I mean, it works, but it's not authentic.
that's the point.
Yeah. And because I train a lot of signature program designers, or I have up until now as well. And it's always entertaining to me when people think, "Oh, I'm just going to invent this with ChatGPT, or I'm just going to put together these parts and I will be a master teacher." And for me, it's the direct experience that inspired any of it, and then the train wrecks and the successes, right? So things have happened that I wouldn't want to happen again, and things have happened that have been amazing. And so it's just a growing basket, a medicine basket, right?
Oftentimes, I think that when people have a spiritual awakening of any kind, their impulse is either to think, "I better keep this to myself because I don't want people to think I'm weird and stand out too much." Or they go all in and I'm like, "I am now going to make my entire life about this." And I think you kind of took that route.
Yeah, it was a choice of no choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was my soul's work.
Yeah. And for you to do that, you still needed to make a living.
I did, but I've had such an enchanted experience, honestly, because I never tried to do any of it. I was flown to Bali to facilitate at a hoop dance retreat after I already retired. A teacher dropped out. They said, "Oh, you're up to this other thing. What is it?" So I led a group of 80 people through Breath of Bliss. And then it was incredible what happened, like profound breakthroughs in this group. And people who lived there said, "You're not leaving Bali. Here's a villa. Let us sponsor you. You can live here for free. Like, let us organize events for you in another villa. Let us take care of everything." And literally every week, like dozens and dozens and dozens of people just hearing word of mouth about this event on motor scooters coming to this other villa. I was making more money in Bali than I ever made in San Francisco. And I was not, I put up a post on Facebook about it or something, but I was not doing what we call marketing in the modern world. So I was just on my own path of awakening. And then I got to show up every week and just share what I was up to. And people would have such profound experiences that the word just carried itself. I mean, that's the reality of living in a vortex.
Sure.
So Bali is a mecca for spiritual tourists. Now it has become so commercial, the spirituality has become so commercialized. It's a different story. It's not where I'm called to be sharing now. I really feel my calling is to go to the mainland, to go to these places that have thresholds of possibility where people are yearning for something they've never even experienced.
That feels really like the word divine or grace, comes to mind when I hear that story, because you were just following the impulse of leaning into this thing that lit you up. And oftentimes we think like, no, I need to work harder and I need to, fabricate this life in order for it to be my destiny. And you didn't do that at all.
I feel very blessed because the same thing happened with Hoop Girl, where I was literally obsessed with this extreme acrobatic movement form to the point where it just created its own global movement through my just showing up in public places and doing it. So, and then it definitely is work, because then I have a mind that works on that sort of a quantum architectural level. I just form and structure organization is part of my genius codes. So like creating curriculums and taking something that's totally formless and psychedelic and creating a structure that anyone could use, that took time.
Got it.
That takes energy. So.
Oh, that's good. Have a little bit of like humility.
Oh, way humility.
With the grace.
Oh, yeah. It's not all grace and flowers. I mean, there's definitely, there's challenges that have arisen along the way. It's not like I've just been riding the rainbow wave. I mean, COVID was case in point. Everything changed. Because before, when I was in front of headlining at a festival, I didn't need to market my trainings. People just showed up and then signed up. Now things are different. The market's hypersaturated, and there's like a one-day master breathworker certifications, and so it's inviting creativity in bringing the work out.
One of the things that you mentioned is that these breath of bliss experiences are psychedelic, and that there are altered states of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And from my understanding, that can only happen, if you are taking a medicine, also known as drugs, also known as, deep initiatory experiences. So how can breath literally be an initiatory experience that is comparable to something like taking psychedelics?
Well, a psychedelic experience generally is informed by the release of dimethyltryptamine from the pineal and pituitary. And this generally happens with substances like ayahuasca or LSD when there's a certain amount of interhemispheric communication that starts happening in the brain, where the amygdala, which is the storehouse of all of our, cloudy memories that were too much for us to metabolize, like all of the most painful things that are kind of held down and kept in control, these things start becoming revealed, and there's communication between the insula, which is more central in the brain, our emotional processing system. And so all of a sudden, we start feeling things that we might not have let ourselves feel for decades. So and that can be great if you haven't let yourself experience ecstatic orgasmic bliss. And it can be terrifying if you actually have not allowed yourself to fully feel fear, sadness, grief, all these other emotions. Then it starts communicating with the prefrontal cortex, your reasoning center, which suddenly, it's almost like your higher self is holding all of it. And it's like it's like a film on a screen. And suddenly you're just seeing the storyline, and but you're not believing you are the storyline. So any identity with being the victim, any identity with being defined by the thoughts, this starts slowly dissolving. Now, if you're resisting that, then there can be contraction in the body, right? So there can be tingling, cramping, numbing in the hands and the face, which is so safe, so safe. We normalize that and natural. But there can be this contraction when we contract against the expansion that wants to happen. And so, the nature of the psychedelic experience is an invitation to let go of everything we've been holding on to, and to open to a possibility of oneness and connection and unity and love as the total reality of being alive and beyond. And so, breath of bliss invites you into that dance of the brain releasing the chemicals of your sense of self being shifted. And are you going to be allowing that, befriending that, or fighting it, or contracting, or stopping your breath? And how you breathe through the whole thing, the permission you're given by the facilitator, by different phrases and the music and the angels, it either allows you to let go, just like a psychedelic journey, or it can cause further contraction. Yeah, and that's why skillful guidance that just is a midwifery of the soul is really key.
And earlier you mentioned the first breath of life and the last breath of life. And inherent in that is the idea of death. And what happens when you die? You let go of the form, enter the formless. Yes. And from that place, you are immersed in love. immersed in God,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And a lot of people have a really hard time dying.
Mm-hmm.
There's this holding on and constriction to what they fear is going to happen on the other side of stepping through that portal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that when I tried breathwork for the first time, I had a lot of resistance. I was very much like afraid of the tingling, of the out of control feeling, because, especially maybe for a masculine, orderly perfectionist type as myself, there's this drive to always be in control.
Yeah.
Always be like at the steering wheel, eyes on the road, like ready for whatever. And this is not like that,
Well, that's the invitation to be a mystic, because it is one who befriends the mystery. And this space where nothing is under control. We cannot have an agenda. We cannot manipulate our experience in any way. We have to utterly surrender to it. And it really reminds me of Bufo, the toad medicine.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that for people who don't know.
So the most profound, life-changing experience I have had has been with the Bufo toad medicine. And in this experience, there was an initial passage into what felt like the void. I felt like the bardos. It was no body. My body was gone. My identity was gone. Every label that I had used to define myself dissolved instantaneously. There was no Christabel. There was nothing I could hold on to define myself. And at first, that was terrifying, because I had never experienced complete ego annihilation. And so I saw lots of lights, and there was like a dark, vast, it was almost like being in the universe. And I resisted it. And then it became very painful and even more scary. But my guide, I actually had two guides there. One of them kept saying, let go. And so I let go and dissolved, and then went into the most euphoric, divine, rainbow, prismatic heart of God. And it helped that my facilitator was playing crystal bowls and doing light language the whole time. And, I actually felt on a physical level what it was to be unified with all of life. And it was orgasmic to feel everything that has ever been and ever will be across all of space and time all at once was like the greatest pleasure. And I was laughing and crying. And then I had this moment of looking over and seeing in this one nanosecond of eternity, this little thing that thought she was called Christabel, that had all these thoughts and beliefs and like identity. And it was just hilarious. And because I realized the truth, and for me, that was a near-death experience. I feel so grateful, because when I die, I know that this is like a preparation, right? To go with grace through the bardos and to surrender to what is completely out of control, which is letting go of the body. And, my mom, when she passed, did not have that kind of grace. I was with her, and she struggled through the last breath, and it was very, very painful to witness such resistance, and fear. And I think that's part of what and when that happened, and I had to be the ceremonialist for my family at the end, in the ceremonies of spreading the ashes and so forth, I felt like everything I had ever done as a facilitator was just preparing me to hold my family. And yeah, so this work feels so important to me, because it is midwifery and it's death dueling, right, for our identity. And we go through so many phases of our lives where we go through the dark nights of the soul, these mini deaths. And, if we can learn how to surrender to what's out of our control and to trust the calling to something new that doesn't have any rational point of security we can hold on to. There's just so much more beauty in life that we can enjoy.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah, the ego death, saying to the protector, take a break. You are not on duty for at least this, moment in time. Your ego can effectively step aside and release control of its role, which is to keep you alive.
Yeah.
We're so grateful for our ego.
Yeah.
And yet,
doing the best it can, it's like, and that's what I feel like this work, it's like this whole community. So we're talking about communities in, in society, but also it's about befriending the community of you. And it's like, oh my goodness, because when we learn how we can relax and give permission to all the people we don't know who are showing up at a ceremony, then it's like, oh, we can start being like, oh, there's my sweet ego. I love you, baby. I'm with you. And there's my inner child. She's so afraid. I'm with you. And then there's my elder. And it's like, all of a sudden we hold the community of all the aspects. And then that calls us into presence again at that level of love.
The initiatory experience of taking a psychedelic medicine that has the component DMT in it, our brains produce DMT.
Naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when people have near-death experiences, they actually get a hit of DMT. That's why people see the white tunnel. That's why they have the out-of-body experiences, and they're like, oh, I know what this is all about now. Yeah. And oftentimes there's this pure clarity on the other side of those. So the true courage, the true bravery of choosing to go into those experiences willingly, but in a ceremonial, intentional, safe container with beloved community. That takes bravery.
Yeah, it takes bravery, and it's so needed in a culture that doesn't talk about what we are all inevitably heading towards, right? Because no one's going to escape this. We're all in it together.
Yeah, you don't get out of it alive. Is kind of the lesson here.
Or alive in the way this shows us that you do get out of it alive, but not in the way your mind thought.
Sure.
Right? And that's the beauty of it. So.
Yeah. Wow. So we just covered all of these different elements of what it means to go on a journey. And, in the element of the hero's journey, what is it like to come home with all of this newfound experience, with all of this insight into the possibility of life, and then bring it to the community?
It is incredible to be able to have a life-changing experience in an hour and a half that literally puts you in direct communication with your soul and gives you a wake-up call to what the truth is. And I feel so many people are living according to the expectations of others or society, and there is a fundamental sense of separation within themselves from what their true calling is or what inspires them. This conformity and dimming down to fit in. And so I think there's a profound potential that happens at the end of these ceremonies where you have this glimpse of what your truth is and what your next steps could be and how you can be more loyal to your soul. And when you listen and live according to your soul's guidance, there is a level of natural fulfillment that is beyond words. It is not about making a ton of money. It is not about exterior collection of objects. It's about the level of congruence with the heart and its guidance that it's bliss. It's bliss when you're doing what your heart tells you to do.
And there's a fair amount of effort that it takes to realign yourself in all aspects of your life, in your relationships, with this new version of yourself that you want to become.
Absolutely. Let's not minimize that, right? Because first of all, there's also the potential dysregulation that can be there in the nervous system at the end of a ceremony. So you need integration. And we do a lot of that in Breath of Bliss. So you need grounding, attunement, orientation, the capacity to come back into presence with the emotions that might be coming up. Because when you give permission to emotions that have been bottled up, a lot can keep coming out, right? So there's a level of holding. That's why it's nice to have coaching and care afterwards, because having it normalized, that it's turbulent. And that just like planes. So when a plane is taking off to the next level, there's natural pressure that creates turbulence. And so there will be time needed for realignment with truth. Yeah.
And on the other side of that alignment, you can then be a voice for what is true and good and real in your world.
Yeah.
And guide people towards that.
Absolutely.
So ultimately, the healing that you endure, the healing that you say yes to, is helping not only yourself, but your family, your lineage, your community. It's like so deep.
Oh, it's profound, because and I don't even call it healing myself, because healing implies there's something broken that needs to be fixed, changed, or saved. And so I love to think of these experiences just simply reminding us of the wholeness and the goodness and the divinity that is already here. And it's just when we wake up to that, sometimes there's misalignment in how we've structured our lives because it doesn't reflect that wholeness and goodness or our body's health, right? And so when we start attending to that self-care, when we are starting to do so much self-care that we're overflowing, that's where we have the capacity to offer community care. So to me, it's a very organic process. It isn't just like, here, I'm going to go on the drama triangle and save everybody with my new technique. It's like, I'm going to attend to my inner temple and my consciousness and my life structures and bring it all into the highest levels of alignment. And then there's overflow. Yeah. That and training people to the unified field you've become, right? So your heart field is becoming more coherent, and your way of being is being more pleasurable to be around, and people naturally want to be around you because you are emanating a state of acceptance and possibly peace, hopefully, right? And that's where I feel the sharing comes organically. You're like a lighthouse.
Yeah, the sharing isn't something that even needs to be like overt, like, I just did this amazing thing, you have to do it. It can literally just be living by example.
Exactly.
And the vibrational change of how you show up day to day. Like you can go back to your accounting job afterwards. It doesn't mean you have to leave that necessarily.
No, it's an emanation.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a field. It's a unified field. Yeah. And you can bring it to anything you do.
Absolutely. That was something that when I was first, going through transformational experiences, I almost felt the need to kind of like conform to this new spiritual community that I found myself in, going to festivals and going to these events where I saw all this new way of dressing and this new way of being. And I was like, am I only good enough if I like become that? Or do I still, have value in the world? Just being changed from the inside out and then offering from that place.
Absolutely. Well, I feel, we spoke about it earlier, but there's so many sort of entrapments of the commercialization of spirituality, and it just perpetuates on some level the identities and the labels and projections and attachments. We can just choose a new one. Now you have to be in the robes, right? And you have to wear your mala beads and all the things. But I feel like ultimately the beauty of Breath of Bliss and so many other practices is that they help you drop the story. And I know that's the name of this podcast. And I feel like I have to come to this because that for me, as someone who has suffered from so many untrue, debilitating stories of something's wrong with me, that is a universal, I get chills just saying it because I feel like there is a current of low frequency energy that has been perpetuated among all of humanity. This low frequency, I'm not enough. And that results in so much overdoing and hustling and suppression and pushing. And this practice helped me wake up to that story. It's just a story. It doesn't even belong to me. It doesn't belong to us.
No, it's cultural.
It's cultural. It's beyond even one culture. I feel like it's It's a species-wide epidemic of not enoughness. And it's perpetuated by stories. And stories are what feed the drama triangle, right? So and to me, the drama triangle lives at the bottom of the map of consciousness. It keeps us in the shame and the blame and the denial and the comparison and all of the frequencies where we don't have to take responsibility. We can be in victim consciousness, right? And so when we breathe in this way, it's just like these little illuminations spontaneously happen. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was a belief. It wasn't true. It isn't who I really am, It's so liberating. Yeah.
There's so many ways that you can access this liberation and this truth in the world. And you literally just have to go out and try it for yourself, don't you?
Yeah. It's direct experience.
Yeah.
And everyone's going to have a different experience.
Yeah. And realizing that sometimes it is not just once you have to do something, but actually a dedication to a practice. Like, I'm sure after someone goes to one of your events, they can go home and practice, portions of it on their own and realize what's possible to access there. But, then there's the myriad of other ways that you can tune in through online, trainings and through workshops and even one-on-one.
Yeah. They're all very different. But I do have to say that's part of why I'm bringing my trainings back in person. Even with the psychedelic audio downloads, people say they have these life-changing experiences, right? But still, when we are sitting here, there's an attractor field happening. Your energy body is speaking to my energy body. Our hearts are listening to each other. And then there's just a potential that can be realized when we're just in the human presence together.
I know that you are about to launch something exciting. You want to share a little bit about it?
Yes. Well, I have the Mystic Breath of Bliss Facilitator training coming up. It's a 200-hour certification program for those who want to own their mystic, and guide breath work in a ceremonial way from a place of personal overflow as a result of their own richness of communion with the divine. And we really impart all of the structures and templates and blueprints to help you liberate your creativity, but also feel safe. And to really set up these breath experiences in a unique way that affirms the divinity of all present and predisposes them to climb that vibrational scale of consciousness up towards bliss, while also welcoming everything along the way. So we start soon, and it is going to be online and live, starting September 9th in this next round. And we have the live portion in Hawaii, October 16 to 26. And it is going to be extraordinary because it's all about direct experience. It isn't just all mental material. While you get manuals and you have all those things, you're constantly being placed in the spotlight as a facilitator, especially during those 10 live days where you lead groups and you get feedback and you evolve as a channel. And it culminates in the festival. All of our students will be presenting and headlining at a festival open to the public, leading their ceremonies, and then going home and getting business coaching while they launch in their own community. So, learning by doing. Yeah.
Wow, so powerful. Grateful for the work that you're doing in the world and for choosing to be that torchbearer, as I mentioned.
I'm so grateful, and being here with you is a blessing to be able to share the work. Thank you.
I look forward to, seeing what comes from your retreat coming up.
Yeah, I would love to have you, weave your artistry in if it makes sense for your schedule, and find a way to particularly in showcasing the students. That's what it's all about for me, is helping them. The part of the beauty of having someone like you there is it helps them see themselves in a way they never saw themselves.
Definitely.
When they get pictures from the photographer and video from a videographer, suddenly they realize they're enough, right? And not just enough, they actually see themselves as these multidimensional channels that they never saw themselves as before. So
yeah, there is something to having a very complimentary image of yourself that makes you realize, like, wow, I'm whole.
Yeah.
I'm like, not even whole, I'm a badass.
Yeah, I'm there already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very affirming is kind of the word. Yeah. And I love creating, media around these transformative spaces because I just love watching people wake up to their potential. And that's why I'm making this podcast in the first place, is I want to really, be that lighthouse for people who are looking for examples of, how it's possible to do that and to shine.
So good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.